Well, this shim's a little bit crusty. It's certainly got some corrosion on it. I'm making sure that all those high spots are gone, because of course they would affect the effective thickness of the shim. Yeah, one side had a few bumps on it. This side is more just what you'd consider normal corrosion marks, which will have no significant effect on that. I still haven't come to any conclusion as to what's caused this corrosion problem. I suspect that the camera has been splashed. Possibly got caught out in the rain, but it can't have been an awful lot of moisture, because it's generally in pretty good order. It's just this very localized corrosion, and my retaining ring's a little bit sort of damaged around the slots there. From fighting to get that thing off, because of course that one was exceptionally reluctant to move. I may have to just see if I can tweak those edges back a bit, otherwise they'll catch on the mount. This may or may not run freely, and I may have to do some work to this. Certainly it goes on smoothly enough to start with. When we get down to this damaged bit around the edge here, I don't know how well it will go. No, that tightens right down, and it ran smoothly enough. That'll be fine. Any dust out. Also, I need to clean these lenses. This is the rear group. Now, interestingly, looking through that rear group, it looks somewhat yellow compared to the front group. I hope that's just a deposit on the surface. I'm about to find out. Well, I've cleaned these lenses and the glass cleaned up well. Now there's an obvious speckle in this lens here, which shows somewhere around here. And it looks like a speck of dust or something, but when you inspect it very closely you see that actually it's a bubble in the glass. Now, bubbles in optical glass used to be a thing. It was often said that it was a sign of good quality glass, because it was obviously an optical glass of whatever type tended to get bubbles in it. It obviously didn't really offer any benefits itself, bubbles in the glass, but you know, it was considered a sign of good optical glass. And really what it amounted to was that the manufacturing processes of the time weren't able to get rid of bubbles like that. You certainly didn't see it after the mid-50s or so. That was a thing of the past. But this certainly does show one. The rear group, yeah, that's certainly more yellow than the front group, but it looks clear enough. There doesn't appear to be any haze at the balsam layer or anything, so I think that's probably fine. And I'll screw that into place. And the lenses just need to be finger tight. As tight as you can do them by finger, that is good enough. And this front trim ring, it drops in there. blow any last dust off that front lens group. That's a bit tight to screw in, but it's okay, it's going in smoothly. Right, there it is, all back together. So that's my shutter good to go. And of course I still got to do the rest of the camera, but at least this part works now. I'll pop it back in the camera and I'll see if it behaves for us. Might be other problems for all I know. Advance that a tooth or so. Oh, that focus is stiff. No, more. And all I'm doing here is shifting the curved rack relative to that transfer shaft in the front of the camera. That's one too far because it doesn't want to go. Let's move it back a tooth. Oh, that. Right. Oh, that's working nicely. No problem with the shutter now. Well, I'm pleased about that. Right, well I've got to do the rest of the work on this camera, of course, and given that I know the shutter has had moisture in it, probably droplets of moisture, there's every likelihood that the rest of the camera suffered the same fate, and I can probably expect to find other minor problems in it. And what leftovers have I got here? Let's bring this lot to the fore. These are the leftover parts from the strip down process. Most of these parts I've rejected because of corrosion on them. Now, having said that, I'm not throwing them out. They'll go into my spare parts containers, and at some stage in the future I might be very pleased to see a lever that looks like that with only those minor spots of corrosion on it, and similarly things like that. I'm not pleased with it at the moment, but I know that at some stage in the future I'll think that's just wonderful. I'll be very pleased to see it. Right, I'll move on. Well, I'd better start stripping down the body of this Retina IIa. So, something through the fork of the rewind, knob comes off, take that off, the advance lever. Well, I've got a tool for doing that. Oh, that was tight. And this tool I just made myself, piece of brass, put a wee knurl in it for good measure, not that that does a lot. Drilled 2 holes, 2 pieces of, I think that was piano wire, might not have been, might have been something else. But 2 small pieces of appropriate sized round steel, and it does a wonderful job. Able to get those screws off without slipping or scarring. Much easier than using mutilated pliers to do the job. If you've got a really robust set of tweezers, you might get away with that. Right, what do we got here? Let's just remove the film release button and its spring. I'm just checking the shutter release to see if there's a spacer washer down in the shaft, on the shaft down inside here, because it's very easily lost if there is one there. And if you know it's present, then you can be watching out for it. That's all good. The rangefinder, 2 screws at the top. That's very, very tight. It's the rangefinder off it. Just looking at this to see if there's any corrosion. There's not really anything obvious. That's good. I'm somewhat nervous, of course, because the shutter certainly had corrosion present. And I replaced quite a few pieces in that shutter as a result. Just dismantle the rewind shaft assembly. Film advance here. Right, let's lift that gear off. And pull out the cocking rack. 3 screws hold the bracket here in place. Now that screw was loose, so was that one. Makes a pleasant change because some of these screws have been very, very tight. And there's one screw right here that also holds that spring, the return spring for the little ratchet lever here, that pull. If I tip that upside down, I should be able to recover the spring from there. Well, I should have been able to, but it doesn't really want to come out. Let's see if I can. Here it is. Got it. Film advance. Why is that so tight? It may be that the top of the film advance has got a twist in it. That's not at all uncommon. If heavy-handed people have had their hands on a Retina IIa or 1A, they can twist the top of the film advance shaft because there's not much metal here. It's a 3mm through hole. It might be 5 across those flats. What happens is that these squared off section here gets a twist in it, and I'm just assessing how much of a twist it's got on that. Often they get bent too. If the camera's been dropped on its head, the film advance lever will have been pushed one way or the other and it'll bend that piece. In a worst case scenario, they snap off, of course. Just remove that little pull and its return spring and the collar that goes underneath. 3 screws on the top of the film advance bush, shaft bush. Just remove the clutch and take that apart. That's the top of the camera. At the bottom of the camera, where's the screwdriver I want? Everything here but the one I want. What have I done with it? That one will do. 2 screws for the surround for the tripod socket. They're very small. They are chrome brass and they're quite easily damaged, so take care getting them off. See if I can lift that. Sometimes the tripod socket's been badly treated. If somebody's really done a job of trying to screw something in there, they can actually bell mouth that. And if it's stretched out, then it's very hard to get this piece off over it. That looks good, and I'll need that leather up now and deal with those big ice bumps that I see at the same time. Where's my favoured weapon? It's got to be here somewhere. Get under that leather. That leather's quite thick. I can peel that back. I only need to peel it back this far, but I'll peel it all the way back to this boss at this end before I put it back down, so that it doesn't show an obvious line when it's glued back in place. Let's get rid of that green corrosion product. It's promoted where there are dissimilar metals. Here we've got brass screws, an aluminium shield there, and of course this is chrome plated brass. The button's chrome plated brass, the screws are nickel plated brass, nickel plated steel. So a very good selection of different metals there, up and down the activity series. Those three tripod socket screws were unusual because they were tight. Tripod socket screws are usually loose. I need to get my rewind button off, and I've got pliers for that. Here's my pliers, made to measure. Trying to make pliers like that, you buy the cheapest pliers you can find at the hardware, because they'll be the softest steel, and then you can drill them away or machine them away to your heart's content. You don't want to be buying something that's hardened. You'd be having to grind your tips away. Much easier if you can drill them away. At the base here, what's left to go? I'll flip the return spring on that. That's the lock lever for the rewind button. Its job is to hold the rewind button in the locked position until you swing the film advance lever again, which unlocks the rewind button. Three screws here hold the guide bush for the base of the film advance shaft. And on the inside of the camera we can lift out the sprocket, film spool, take-up spool, and the bush from the bottom of the take-up spool. I want to take the door off now, the front door, 2 hinge pin screws. There's probably at least one washer, either at the top or the bottom, to take up any slack at that point. Make sure the door doesn't rattle. There's a washer at the top. And there was one at the bottom too. To get this off, I'm going to stretch it downwards to unhook it. It's got its paper washers. Both are present and correct, so I'll make sure I don't lose those. Here, take the two screws from the front here. This is the cover or shroud for the gear on the front of the transfer shaft that transfers the action from the cocking rack at the back of the camera through to the shutter to cock the shutter. I'll remove the two screws here from the inner helical. They hold this bracket on place, and this bracket couples to this arm at the top of the camera, which in turn pulls the rangefinder forwards as you rack the focus forwards. Now, I need to mark the position of my focus scale ring relative to the focus helical so everything goes back together in the right place. I can't back that round enough to have all my surfaces on the same plane, but I can certainly mark my focus scale ring and the outer helical. And there are already marks there that somebody else has put in between the inner helical and the outer helical. So they are probably adequate. I'll check them, but I expect that they'll be good enough for me to use as a guide for reassembly. Got 4 screws here. They just clamp the focus scale ring to the outer focus helical. That can lift off. 4 black screws here go through the focus mount and hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. So if I undo 4 of those, the bellows will probably pull back into the body. They just did. 4 larger screws here hold the focus mount onto the front standard, and I'm supporting the front standard with finger and thumb here so I'm not crushing the struts mechanism, because otherwise you might bend it. That's that. Let's gather those screws up. Focus mount. So recover the 4 screws that hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. And all of these screws and bits and pieces, just about everything that hasn't got paint on, is going to go in the degreaser shortly and then into the ultrasonic cleaner. Right, there are 6 screws hold this retaining ring, and the retaining ring holds the inner and outer focus helical components into the focus mount. These are countersunk head screws. They're the same size as the 4 that held the focus scale ring in place. So there are 10 screws in total, the same. Alright, lift off the retainer, lift the inner and outer helical out of the mount. Now I'm just checking this, so I want to check it against these alignment marks, and no, they don't line up where I expected them to. What I need to do is make sure that when the inner and outer surfaces are dead level with each other, which is probably about I've gone the wrong way. About there, that I've got an alignment mark I can follow so that I can put them back in exactly the same place. And I'll extend my marks that I've made on the outer helical through at this point so that I've got a good reference. That's good. And they can come apart. Now the struts, I want the struts out of the body. There are 2 screws in the film cassette chamber. They're probably not loose because they really are. Let's see if it'll... No, it's certainly tight. This one is not only tight, I can see a bit of corrosion on it. I need my hammer.